Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast where we're kicking off season 15 Behind the Brand. In this episode, I'm joined by Ashley Pollock, Head of Culture and Transformation at Vivo Barefoot. Now, I must confess that this conversation happened earlier in the year when the season was first being recorded. But as I shared in the intro to this season, things got moved around due to international women's sessions that I just had to share. So, in that time, Ashley has got married. Congratulations, Ashley, and started a new culture adventure. But in this episode, Ashley gives us the insight into how Vivo Barefoot developed their unique company culture that sees them continuing to be strong innovators in sustainable footwear. So, without any more delay, let's dive in. Hi, Ashley, and welcome to Make It Thrive.
Hi, Lizzie. Wonderful to be here.
It's been so wonderful to be around your energy over the past few months of the voice notes that we've exchanged and the emails, and just your whole energy and vibrance for culture has got me so excited to have this conversation. So I suppose the place I would love for us to kick off is, where does this energy and passion for culture come from, Ashley? I'd love to hear a bit of your story.
Good question. I don't know if it has a simple answer. Um, it's been a lifelong journey, to be honest, a curiosity for human connection, what makes us tick. I started out in a corporate career. It didn't work for me, and I didn't realize that the calling was actually to come back to reconnection. And it took me 29 years to figure that out. And luckily, when I joined Vivo, there was this role. I wasn't in, I actually had a food science background, and then I was in product development, and then I was in financial consulting. And Galahad, the CEO of Vivo Barefoot, we worked together I was a consultant for 4 years in something else, and kind of said, do you want to come in and take on this people and culture lead role? And I was completely taken aback. And I think his faith in me of taking the part, he saw something, probably that energy that you saw and this potential. And he really gave me a chance. And I must say, it's completely lit my whole life on fire. And so I think, yeah, it's come from somewhere really primal within me, but it took somebody else to see that, to really bring that out. So I'm eternally grateful for that opportunity. It's been a wonderful 4-year ride.
I love that so much. Do you know, it's so nourishing to hear when you meet those people who just are such a catalyst in your life, and you look back and you think, wow, if I'd never have met that person, how different might my life be? Because they've really been a catalyst for so much of that journey. So I just absolutely love hearing that, Ashley. So we're here to talk about Vivo Barefoot. So what's
Mm.
unique about Vivo Barefoot? Tell our audience a bit about Vivo Barefoot.
So Vivo Barefoot was founded probably now about 12 years ago. Two Quaker seventh generation cobblers. So a cobbler's a shoemaker with a last, and hand used to be all hand done. From the Clark's dynasty, actually, from that shoe brand. But Asher and Galahad, as cousins, grew up in South Devon on the coast barefoot. And they had this epiphany once through a friend of theirs, actually a childhood friend, who took a Nike shoe, tore off the bottom, like took the sewing off, and almost put just a really flat piece of material at the bottom and said, this is how shoes should be made. And Galahad said once he saw that, he could never unsee or unhear what he had realized and understood in that moment. And that's where Vivo Barefoot was born, to take a Clark's, where that had come from originally, and reinvite that into the modern day. So it's barefoot footwear at its most natural, using either natural materials like a leather, cork, etc., or using fully recycled materials, so polyester, for example, and then allowing the foot, which actually the foot is the best technology inside a shoe. A shoe doesn't need lots of technology. The foot just needs to be allowed to do its natural thing. And it took a long time for the education piece around why barefoot to actually make waves within, our society. And I'd say in the last kind of 4 years, it's really started to hit home with this whole natural health and wellness kind of theme that's happening. We're all kind of waking up of going, why am I wearing kind of Procter & Gamble deodorant when it's actually really toxic for me? What's the natural alternative? Same as kind of footwear. So that's where it was born, and the culture around it, I think it started out as a very normal, founder-led, kind of everyone was going, everyone was innovative. And it took a long time, like kind of 6, 7 years, and I was working with Galahad and Asher as a consultant. I've been working with them for 7 or 8 years. So the first 4 years I was a consultant, and then the last 4 years have been obviously as an employee. So I've really seen the organization grow from probably it was about 4 to 5 million to now nearly 100 million. And the whole evolution of that. And the culture was a very traditional, founder-led, as I said, really entrepreneurial. I think that was the key things were entrepreneurial, fast-moving, really rapidly fast-moving. And then it became a bit toxic at that kind of stage of kind of 30, 40 people. And then there was, I think, again, Galahad and Ash went back to their roots, their Quaker roots, and went, hold on, this shouldn't be how it feels to be here. And I think that's also when the catalyst around Vivo being on the culture journey, which I know your audience are most excited about, I think that was also the catalyst where they went, hold on, how do we do things differently? And Galahad says he read Giles Hutchins' book, Regenerative Leadership, and then met Giles in the woods in his woodlands in Sussex. Very beautiful, very special place. And they started this journey towards creating a regenerative culture. And then that kickstarted a whole different kind of, say, almost a whole different epoch of what Vivo Barefoot was and would become and where it is today.
Oh my goodness, that whole journey. And just like you say, there is always that kind of like sticking point with companies when they hit about kind of 40 people and they're in that growth phase. And it does kind of become a bit like, oh, hang on a minute, we're now too big to be a startup, but we're too small to be like a big company. And it really is that like sticking point for a lot of companies. And it's fascinating that actually, luckily Galahad had this real purpose about his business where he could like reflect back and go, well, hang on a minute, is this how we should be doing things, connecting to our purpose and the way we want to do things? So do you feel like that core purpose and that real kind of values driven ethical approach to culture has helped kind of shift it in that direction?
I would say that's pretty much the most important ingredient in this journey is having the leadership and decision makers buy into it, because otherwise it becomes a bit of a prove your worth, where's the ROI, and then you come and it just becomes metricified and then it gets stuck. We know that culture isn't just a KPI. We do need to measure it, of course, we've done that over the 4 years, but there's also something different, how it feels, that you can't always measure in its entirety. And I think that, yeah, so it's been a journey of also trying to figure out how do we measure it in a way that makes sense without stifling it, and then how do we also let it live in other ways. And Galahad is an incredible visionary. Asher, his cousin, is so Galahad is the CEO or Chief Ecosystem Officer, as we call him. And Asher does all the design, incredible creative. And the two of them have the soul connection to deeper purpose and like the reason why we're here is just not to make money and sell more stuff. And so that's been a really interesting tension to work with. And then also as the organization has grown, the tension around bringing new people in, new leadership in, do they get that? How do we help reintroduce those deep centered, almost like the ancestral way of thinking into people that haven't been taught that before? And that was a lot of our onboarding and reboarding, and a lot of the challenges we had is kind of actually bringing people into this deeper connected place, but also still getting them to, really perform in what we were doing and understand our business.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. There's so much that I want to dive into there, but I'm going to hold myself back. Because one thing I do want to pick up on what you mentioned as well is about regenerative leadership. So for those who are kind of listening, who perhaps haven't heard this term before, Ashley, are you all right to kind of explain a bit more about what that is and how that's envisaged?
So regenerative, it's almost going back to how nature naturally repairs and regenerates itself. So I'll just use a simple example. A fallow field, in the UK, for example, maybe that's been farmed till dust. If we regenerate that farm, it comes back maybe in the UK to a field of wildflowers. In the Amazon will obviously be like a thriving Amazonian forest, but it's that rewilding, that reconnection So regenerative leadership is taking those nature-based principles into a leadership application and literally just allowing, cutting back all the other stuff, just simply being more human, being more whole, and being able to lead from a place of more sovereignty, which can sound a bit woohoo, but when you're in that space, you can command a room more, you have more respect, and you also can therefore perform more because you have more psychological safety and the ability to actually have really hard and tough feedback if you need to, or really celebrate together, which I think a lot of the time we forget about these things in our rat race of life. So yeah, simply put, it's just going back to how nature regenerates, repairs, and therefore creates survival to thrival.
It's so powerful, I think, when you kind of have that mindset of the regenerative leadership, because it's like you say, it's really easy for people to look at some of these ways of working or ways of being, kind of go, oh, it's a bit fluffy, it's a bit woohoo. But actually, this stuff is in practice what we see in nature. It comes from so many of the tribal community ways of being, eons ago when we were, back in our tribal days. But it's kind of like we've lost that to this kind of command and control or very overly authoritarian way of leadership. So what would you say to leaders who are kind of looking at taking that journey of that regenerative leadership? Is there something, you mentioned Giles's book, is there anything for them to consider or read or watch?
I think the two biggest inspirations for me, well, let's do three. I do think Galahad's vision and his balance, his just certainty of that has been amazing to see and watch. Yeah, Giles Hutchins is still a very close friend and a mentor, and he has written various books. I think regenerative leadership is the best starting point for anybody who's new to it. But then in Leading by Nature, he's done a now third book since we've been working together. He, yeah, writes a lot and it's wonderful. But in Leading by Nature, we actually do a case study on Vivobarefoot. We did a guest, Galahad and I did a guest edition, a chapter in there. And that also then, in quite simple terms, helps explain what we did. So it's actually a nice tool if anybody wants to understand a bit more from after today. And the third thing is a book called Reinventing Organizations by Frederick Laloux. He doesn't go into regenerative. So regenerative is nature-based leadership, but he goes into teal, which is obviously self-managing. And I think that's actually a really nice taster into what is leadership over the eons, how has it actually changed in our society over time? And then how is teal manifested and why? And then I almost think regenerative, it's a part of teal, but it's almost the next step. So Giles has a podcast, and Frederick Laloux, I recommend the picture book as a starter because you can actually get through it almost in a day or two, and you get the principles, whereas the other book, it's pretty big.
Yeah, it really is. I've still got so many sticky notes stuck in my
Yeah.
original reinventing organizations.
Yeah.
So they are some great resources actually. But you mentioned there as well that I know from sort of doing some research around Vivo that you are kind of going for that decentralized approach with your culture as well. So how did that journey begin? Because that's obviously not an easy choice and an easy decision to go down either.
When we started, we looked at how are teams, so functional teams like departments, so we don't say departments, we have a different language at Vivo, but how are departments connected? And then how are people not like within the departments connected? And we realized we needed to not just have departments with interdepartmental, like sales must talk to marketing, but actually like finance must talk to marketing people who are who are talking to customers because everybody. So we thought, how do we actually connect people more? One of those rationales was because as you decentralize leadership and decision making, one of the reasons why a hierarchy works is because if you take a traditional triangle with the CEO at the top, all the information flow arrows go upwards to him or her, and it means they have all the information to then make a decision, and that's how they keep that command and control because nobody else has as much information. So we thought, okay, we've got to connect people to have more conversations, that everybody's got more information so they can make better decisions where they are. And one of those things was, I said, we called them home circles, being your departments, and project circles being cross-functional, mission-aligned teams, which were very random, but still they still had a project and they had a team behind them that was intentional. It wasn't just anybody coming together. And then we also had a look at, okay, so it still wasn't working. Those information flows I was talking about, one of our failures was we still weren't giving the right people the right information at the right time. So as we started to get these teams to work, departments more cross-functionally, the project circles, we then had other information that still wasn't disseminated. So we kind of had to come up with a very simple but a more intentional comms strategy. How do we tell all different people across the organization different types of information? A lot of learnings. I think anybody in comms knows that that is a really, really difficult job, and it's still not perfect. And the other thing we looked at was not really in terms of the self-management piece or the decentralizing, but as you decentralize or you expect people to self-manage, you're taking away management -1, you adding, I used to say, 3 times as much leadership. And expecting someone to manage, it's quite not easy, but you kind of give them a box, the boxes to tick, and you get them to manage. And leadership, it's a sense, it's a sensing, leading. It's a much more wise role that you need to allow people to move into. So we thought people can't just click into that immediately. They've got to be held in that through coaching. We thought coaching and mentoring. So two things we did. We created what I called yin circles. So yang was the departments or the project circles, doing, connecting, saying. The yin circles were everybody was divided in the organization into, we called them a pod, just a pod of people. We put them into our teams of 12, and we were then guided through understanding what regenerative leadership is, why it's important, how it applies to Vivo's culture and why, and then what that means for everybody. So that we started educating slowly, and it took a year to educate, and then another year for it to start living. And about the 3rd year, I think it really started to, take on its own life. So it's really a bit of just a journey. And with those pods, it was amazing because it allowed people to learn in a small community, a safe community, and it allowed them to also start sharing. So one of the biggest things I feel about self-managing and regenerative is to take off your masks. What are Ashley's masks? So I had a lot of imposter syndrome, had a lot of a feeling to need to be perfect, actually allowing those masks to come off and just to be me. And for example, now in conversation with you, Lizzie, to be able to be me with you in your real form. And so those are little practice circles, not just of this is regenerative, this is Vivo's values, etc., but how it feels to actually be in that sort of environment. And then the second thing was we created a group of what we called proprioceptors. Proprioception just means our ability to sense and feel with our hands, ears, goes into our brains. So that comes from barefoot, our Vivo language. But those proprioceptors were a group back then of 12 people. It's now quite a lot more, but 12 people across the organization. There had to be a good spread across all teams and project circles. And they also had to have a level of leadership awareness within them, no matter their seniority. So it didn't matter how old they were or etc., or how senior, but it mattered that they had almost like a je ne sais quoi for leadership and understanding. And we brought those people together, we made them publicly known. So it meant that anybody within each team knew who their proprioceptor was, and they then gave feedback to those proprioceptors, active feedback all the time. How's this feeling? How's it going? What's your input? Has this landed? Was that clear? So we got really active feedback, but in a safe environment before we were psychologically safe as an organization. And then it allowed Giles Galahad and myself, because Giles worked with us proactively throughout this whole process, to actually sense in regularly, quarterly, we would meet with those proprioceptors and understand how is the system doing? Where's the tension? And a lot of that time it would be teams that just weren't thriving. For example, there were issues in our finance team where really, for many reasons, we could go into another chat, but it really wasn't working. Leadership team within that wasn't working. The people, it was just quite stuck. And then there was another issue in the ops team, quite completely different, but again, things weren't working. So it allowed us to actually go in and say, this really is an issue. Here's the feedback. How do we actually proactively deal with it? And then the third thing and last thing were coaches. So we created, again, these are the yin circles, a group of coaches. So it started with 6 of us who were trained, and we actually developed our own, it's called Barefoot Coaching, our own coaching course, which we then taught people internally how to be a coach, allowed them to learn with actual coaches within the organization, always cross-functioning, so never within the same team. Again, it's a bit of psychological safety, and like, my boss isn't going to, even though we didn't have that, but my boss isn't going to tell me off, or it's not going to get back to them. And then it allowed coaches to grow within their own skills, and people to be held and coached and mentored within transitions into the business, maybe transition within the business into different teams. Maybe they're just coming back from maternity leave and needing some help and support. And so all of these different teams, you can imagine these yin circles, became mycelium within the organization. You almost didn't see them, but they were all working furiously underneath to keep the woodland, or our, Vivo woodland, connected, getting feedback of where the nutrients or the sun wasn't shining and how. So it became this amazing, this amazing system that we slowly started building around supporting this regenerative or more self-managing, decentralized organization.
Oh my gosh, Ashley, that is just phenomenal to hear all of that. I mean, there's so many insights in that. I don't
So
even know where
many.
to start to unpack first, but I think one thing that really I definitely want to hit on is I love the fact that at Vivo Barefoot you've created your own language for things. Like that is just, I think that in itself even changes your mindset to how you approach things. Like, tell me a bit more about that language. Like, where did that come from? Because there's just so many beautiful descriptors and words that you use to really, create that culture itself as well. I think that's such a vital part that so many people miss out on because, like you say, we're taking away managers but giving 3 times leadership, but then there needs to be leadership. And how do you label leadership without going down that traditional, like, let's be honest, we all get the ick when someone says manager or supervisor. We're like, ooh. So tell me a bit more about the language and how you guys kind of, yeah, develop that.
Really good question. So interesting. So I actually love words and the written word. I'm not always very eloquent when I speak, but when I write, I love it. And I think it's really important going back to the reason we developed words was to give meaning to something. So if you go back to that original intention, calling somebody a manager if they're supposed to be a leader doesn't make sense. And it's interesting when we started out this journey. So as you said, my energy is infectious. That's one of my very healthy tensions, but also it can be overwhelming to people. And also people can, especially in a cultural role, sometimes go, almost like mistrust sometimes because it maybe can feel too much. And in the beginning, there was quite a lot of feedback that we can't develop our own language. Like, just call us a manager. Why are you changing the language? And I said to them in the beginning, okay, well, I think we did dial it up a little bit much, and that was definitely me. Galahad will say, Ash didn't always keep it simple. But I think the intention behind it was it has to be something different, but it also has to be simple to understand. That was also the learning. Calling it proprioceptors for Vivo makes sense because we understand proprioception because of barefoot, but guarantee all your audience are going, Ash explained that, but now I can't remember what it is. So the learning was when you change the language to something that is simple but different for people to understand, it feels different but simple. And then people understand that actually the culture is different. So going back to it, it was one of the best decisions that we made. I think Galahad also has always been somebody, we've got a lot of V health, Vivo biome, all these different V or Vivo esques. And I kind of felt that, yes, we can Vivoify things. And he started with, wonderful. But then I think we also over Vivo, everything became a Vivo. So how do we actually take it back to just really simple language? And so there would be this tension between him and I, the proprioceptors, Giles, anybody we get feedback from. How do we actually develop this language? And I must say, to date, most of it is stuck around. Let me tell you another fun name. So one of the things that also makes it decentralized in terms of leadership is the way that we pay people. Sorry, not pay them, the way that we decide on what people are paid and who gets increases. And one of the most important things there, I think Galahad at one point said, we should go fully transparent. We're trying to be really open and honest and transparent. Let's just like make it all really open. And I was new into the people role, probably like 6 or 8 months in. Bear in mind, I have no HR or people experience, and I kind of looked at this and I thought, no, this is not going to work. There's too many anomalies and just slight uneven things for reasons that were fine, but now to tell anybody who's reading it that let them to understand that, I was like, no, this isn't going to be good. So I asked Galahad, which I advise anyone to do, the why. What is your why? And he said something along the lines of, I want to ensure fairness and transparency of pay and reward across the ecosystem being our team. And that's what I ended up coining. And we created an evolution council. Evolution being growth and development. I thought growth and development, I'm just not HR. Nature evolves. That doesn't have extreme evolutions, but it evolves over time. That's what we as humans do too. And a council is a, shoulder to shoulder, equal discussion group of elders, wise people. So the Evolution Council became the people lead me at the time, Galahad, our CEO, and our finance lead. So again, we don't say a CFO, we'd say finance lead or marketing lead. And then we had 3 people from across the organization who we actually opened it to not a nomination, they had to put themselves forward and say why they were interested. And then you would have a vote of whoever put themselves forward. We then voted of who would be best within that time. And then we had 6 people who had full transparency. Obviously, of course, people lead, CFO and CEO always have salary transparency. But these 3 other people from across the organization, again, there were no directors on there. It was other people across the organization, generally who, again, had this wisdom, wise-esque nature to them, the je ne sais quoi, and a level of cross-functional nature within them that they knew quite a lot of people. And then what we did is, instead of the employee having to go to their manager and say, please, sir or ma'am, can I get an increase? This is why. I said, that makes no sense. I said, actually, let's make them a team. Let's put the lead or manager with the employee and put them together. They've got to come up with a proposal together. And we had a little spreadsheet that was like, what salary you're on, what's the proposed increase, what is the rationale? And you had, that's very simple. Please give the rationale why and explain, when was your last increase? So you kind of had all the information on one Word document, nothing fancy. And they had to come to council, and it was give or take July and January, we gave increases, a couple of months before. And they would have to then go, this is the team, the 2 of us believe that this is how we have to go about it. And that completely changed the energy of things. And so again, having a lead instead of a manager and having this evolution council, it just changes the whole way that things feel and therefore also how things are.
Oh my goodness, that's a phenomenal practice. And in terms of how people, is that still a practice today that you guys follow at Vivo Barefoot?
Yeah.
That's still something that's going, and what's been the kind of response to that way of, deciding pay? Because it's so unique, isn't it? Right? It's technically people are deciding their own salaries, and so it's really one of the most mature sort of self-managing practices that are out there. What's been people's responses?
So yeah, I guess they don't decide their own salary, but they come to a council which helps decide what the budget from finance is and then how we deploy that. In the beginning, it was quite tricky because people weren't sure how to fill in the form and how much information. But over time, obviously, everyone gets used to understanding that also you don't have a conversation 5 minutes before the form needs to have, go into the council. It actually starts with conversations 6 months before. So that all is like a learning piece. So I think there's always this natural overwhelm, things are changing. But then there's natural energy and excitement of going, this feels better. It's not perfect. Like nothing at Vivo, G or call Galahad G. He will say it, I will say it, anybody, that nothing is perfect at Vivo. It's still pretty chaotic, pretty wild, very wonderful. And this council, I think, we've always iterated a bit on improving it, of who's on there, how we vote them in, how we decide on budgets. But it's definitely well received in terms of us really just trying to do things differently, but also differently in a way that works for Vivo. because that one size of, how we've done it isn't going to fit every other organization. But it's just to show that just think outside the box. What is your why? So ask or decide what is your why, and then solve for it. And our brains are very good at solving for a why, but they're very bad at solving for just anything, just innovating. But if you give the boundaries of can't be fully transparent, it needs to be fair, put people together as a team, like it shouldn't be a manager deciding. Another thing we did is, as part of that duo team, just thinking of feedback, we actually had to get a feedback of a third person into that. They could choose who it was as a duo, but you had to have that feedback coming in into that proposal going into council again. So it's more 3D, not just 2D in terms of manager and employee.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you touched on there as well, Ashley, that there's no such thing as perfect, because it's so easy, right, for people that are maybe on their own culture journey, maybe internally or working with clients, to think that there's some perfection out there. And it's always that I always say that progress over perfection. Like what are we just kind of turning the dialogue on next? What are we kind of trying to improve upon next, rather than trying to overhaul the whole system? But I'd love to hear as well, Ashley, some of the more sort of Vivo-esque culture practices that you guys have. So you've got the salary area. What other things would people find if they were to come and visit Vivo Barefoot? What would they experience as part of the culture practices there?
One of the main ones I was talking about, these pods. These pods in COVID started online. It's actually when we started all this. We meet in the woods. So Vivo also has a nature home. It used to be we rented Giles's Woodlands, for the first 4 years, and Vivo about a year, 6 to 8 months ago, actually kind of decided on their own nature home just outside of Bristol. This beautiful walled gardens where Epicurean, the restaurant, used to be. And so you end up coming down for equinox and solstice celebrations with the whole company at the nature home 4 times a year, where you will do breath work or yoga or foraging, and somebody local who understands the foraging, or creativity, weaving a basket, all these different activities to help people, again, become more whole and to reconnect. We feast together, we drink wine together, we dance together, almost as like a little mini Vivo Festival. And then those pods also come down and meet in the woodlands together. New joiners need to come in at least twice a year in their first year, so that they really start to understand what these Vivo values and the Live Barefoot culture is, how it feels, and to help them start on their own journey. And it also gives them this amazing ability with other people who are new, for them to also cross-functionally connect in person, and then, online, what did Ash say again? Or didn't quite get what Giles did, or, where can I find, so they create a little community. And then we also have this, pay and the structure of that. We call our teams, as I said, circles instead of departments. We have these project circles that still work. And we're very cross-functional. And you really can go to anyone at any point. There is a different shift, there is a different feeling. But I must say the shadow side of all of this lovely, it sounds wonderful, is that there's a really big expectation of people to be their best selves. And sometimes that can feel forced. And sometimes people's best selves isn't in a social environment, gathering together and sharing. They're introverts who maybe really struggle with that. So it doesn't necessarily mean that this fits all people. Of course, our culture, I always used to say my responsibility is to try and help everybody's light shine in whatever light color, maybe if they, are sparkly, maybe it's rainbows, maybe it's a disco ball, maybe it's just a more dim, warm orange, and that's all fine. But people often struggle with that journey of their own personal journey, because that's the expectation that you're going to be on a journey.
Yeah.
And then also the high performance, Vivo is extremely entrepreneurial, hugely fast moving. If I'd go away for a week on holiday and I come back, and John, our CFO or finance lead, used to be like, you've really missed out a lot. Here's the download. Things have really changed. And really in a week, it would be a huge difference. So, it doesn't come without its shadow sides. All of these things, again, trying to be really real with people to understand that it's not all rosy, but of course, it is still wonderful, and it's really, really different. And I'm really proud of the people. And I just think, thinking now back onto the coaches and how they've grown in their own way, and those proprioceptors, how each of them, without any leadership position in their own way, have become leaders just because of that responsibility of being that proprioceptor, the same as the coaches, and just how people have changed the way they have conversations. Like we almost have more difficult conversations, which is good, I think, because we need to have them, but in a way that is more supportive, and also that's more early on. It's much better to try and course correct a little bit when things are, not going so well in the beginning, then 5 or 6 or 8 months, maybe years in, where actually now it's so wrong, it's so off, you almost just have to slice, clear things out and kind of, move forward, and it becomes really difficult. So I must say I'm really proud, and I've got like a warm, fuzzy feeling in terms of, the work we've done, and the people whose lives we've changed at Vivo.
Yeah. Oh, I can always feel that warmth and vibrance shining off you, Ashley. So I can feel it here as well. I suppose I love that you've hit on the fact that it is sometimes, a really big personal development journey, and that can be also a real challenge for individuals because it's a completely different work experience, right, than what they're maybe used to. So have you created a unique kind of recruitment process to find people that will kind of flourish at Vivo Barefoot? Because, I know myself from working with sort of self-managing organizations that, some people just get a little bit in and then they think, oh, absolutely, this isn't actually for me and I'm going to go off somewhere else. So is there a uniqueness to your recruitment process now, though, you've tried to find people who can flourish?
Interesting question, important question. So I think for me, the main things was to discern, did we want people to all be 100%, let's just call it live barefoot, so as in we're living our culture? Was that really important to us? Or was it important that we didn't mind? Or was there somewhere in between? So for example, I actually went to the in between and went, they don't have to be completely living barefoot, but they have to know 100% that how Vivo is and how it feels to be in it, warts and all. For everything wonderful and all the thorns on those roses, they need to understand that, and then they need to make the decision of going, yes, I'm in. Because if it isn't for them, we need to figure that out in the recruitment process. So I always tried to make sure that leads had that conversation very early on. I called it like a chemistry call, but it was really just going, this is Vivo, this is the role, who are you? What are you looking for? Is this the right thing? Quite quickly, and it's really warts and all. And before you get into all the rest. And so we also then started again, I told you about that comms or communication, telling the right people the right things at the right time. And one of those things was around getting new recruits or people in the recruitment process. What information should we be giving to them? When? In order to allow them to make a good decision of, is this the right thing for them to join or not? And one of those things that we changed, as I said, was this chemistry call. We also created, so we don't have policies, we call them guidelines, because it's not a policy, it is a guideline. If you want to go against the guideline in a very significant way, you might not have a job potentially, but you're an adult and you can make that decision. But was actually creating a short, we called it the Barefoot Code, which was our guidelines, and we called it Barefoot Light for new joiners or new recruits. And so we gave that to them quite early on in the recruitment process for them to, just read through stuff, listen to some podcasts, maybe with Giles and I talking about our culture. So we gave them that information. And then we also, I changed the whole way. So classic Ash. As soon as I got into the role, I looked at the contract and I just said, I can't actually sign because I had to sign a lot of the contracts. I was like, I can't sign this. It's a 28-page legalese, jargony. Like, at least I understand, if you weren't word by word, I'm not dumb. But it was just exhausting to go through. And I thought, no, I wrapped it up and I called the lawyers and I said, we need to rewrite the contract. And they said, what do you want to do? I said, make it 6 pages and take out all the stuff that doesn't make sense to anybody reading it. They said, that's not really possible. We need the terms. So I said, yeah, we need the terms, but they just need to be easily understood and written in as little words as possible. So, and I said, I'm also going to get a designer to redesign the contract. And they said, but you can't design the contract. And I said, well, I'm not going to like, put bows on it, but I'm going to put some Vivo pictures of, people we always running barefoot or swimming somewhere or hot saunering or whatever, all over the wonderful, the UK countryside. I was like, I'm just going to make it feel more human. And I said, I also want to theme everything. Like always you going like, where's all the information? And so our offer letter is completely different. Our contract was completely different, and it took quite a long time, but it was a really important for me, a stamp of going, things are different here, be aware they are. So, all of these ingredients were at various phases, but they actually meant that when people joined, they really knew that Vivo was quite different and that they needed to, hopefully they therefore understood that, could make a good decision when joining the organization.
Yeah. I love that you called it a chemistry call. I mean, yet again, great great vocabulary. I just feel like it's little like practices like that can make such a difference to the whole culture, and also when you think of it from a candidate's perspective, that's refreshing, right? Because how often do you kind of go through the interview and the recruitment process and you still don't really know what the culture is going to be like? So yeah, absolutely love that. So we're coming to a close, and I would love to hear, what would you say to those listening, Ashley, who've been really inspired by the journey? What kind of words of wisdom do you have for people looking to embark on their own culture journey?
Great question, and thanks for having me again. I would say take one step that makes sense for you. Don't concentrate on the 55 maybe you need to take to, inverted commas, get to where Vivo is. Just concentrate on that one step you need to take with the vision of your why. Because I think we always get overwhelmed with that whole process. There's a saying, and I can't remember who said it, but nature never rushes, yet everything is achieved. And so I think almost you need to channel a bit of that, of going, don't project manage it all, let it live, let it come, and take that first step. And once you've taken that first step, the next couple will show themselves. After step 3, maybe you can see to 6, because actually maybe getting a bit of momentum, but don't get overwhelmed by the destination, enjoy the journey.
Mm. Yeah, that's just a metaphor for life, right? What a great place to close. Oh, thank you so much, Ashley, for coming on to the podcast and for sharing so much of the inspiring work going on at Vivo Barefoot. So thank you so much. You've been listening to Make It Thrive, the company culture podcast.